There is a saying in Denmark that a wolf is only ever three things: a name, a scent, and whatever the two of them can get up to together. Most people repeat the saying the way people repeat any old thing, fondly and without listening to it, the way you might pat a wall you have leaned on your whole life without once wondering whether it would hold. Elowen had leaned on that wall her whole life. She would find out, before the sun came up, exactly how little it held. She would find out alone, with her hand flat against a door that would not open for her, in a corridor full of people who had known her that morning and could no longer feel that she was there. And the cruelest part, the part she would never be able to explain to a single soul, because there would be no soul left who could hear it, was this: it would be quiet, no scream, no struggle, no grand and terrible spell. Just a woman standing in a warm hall growing slowly colder, watching the people she loved look straight through the space where she used to be. But that is the end of the night. The night, like most disasters, began somewhere far more ordinary. It began with a door left the width of a hand ajar, and a voice she would have known anywhere saying a name that was not hers. The trouble had started at nightfall, in the High Hall of Denmark, with the delegation from Kolvani eating their host out of 3 winters of stores and calling it diplomacy. Elawan had spent the feast the way she spent most things, at the edge of the room where the light did not quite reach, watching. She was good at the edges. She had been raised in them. A foundling with no bloodline and no scentkin, taken in as an infant by the keeper of the weave herself and reared in the cold stone warmth of the right hall, Elowin had grown up understanding that she was a guest in every room she entered, and that a guest keeps to the wall. What she had not understood, not until this particular nightfall, was that she had let herself believe otherwise about exactly one person. She had let herself believe it about the king. It was not a thing she had ever said aloud. Emmerich of Denmark was the son that the whole kingdom turned its face toward, and Elowin was a nameless woman who mended right cloth and carried messages the keeper did not trust to anyone else. But there had been a bond between them all the same, quiet and unspoken and real. She had felt it the first time he had looked at her, and actually seen her, which was more than most people in that hall had ever managed. She had felt it deepen over 2 years of stolen conversations in cold doorways, of a king who kept finding reasons to walk the long way past the right hall. She had felt it, and she had been fool enough to trust the feeling, and now she stood in a corridor outside his private council with a jug of watered wine going warm in her hands, and she heard the feeling die. The door was open the width of a hand. Through it came Osric of Kolvan's heavy voice, and then, unmistakably, Emmerich's. "The alliance will hold," Emmerich said. "You have my word on it. I will name your daughter Luna before the sealing, and the 2 packs will be one." Elowin did not hear what came after. There was a sound in her ears like deep water. She had heard the shape of the thing, and the shape was enough. Ilva of Kolvan. Luna, before the sealing, which was to say within the week. She set the jug down very carefully on the flagstones, because her hands had stopped being reliable, and she walked away before the part of her that was still hoping could make her lean closer and hear the rest. She did not remember the walk down through the lower halls. She remembered only that the bond, the quiet thing she had carried without naming for 2 years, chose that moment to make itself fully known. It woke in her chest like a coal blown on, warm and insistent, and pointed back the way she had come, toward him, and she understood with a sick and dizzy clarity that the old saying had been wrong. A bond was not a gift. A bond was a rope tied to a ship that was already sailing without you, and she was going to feel every league of the water for the rest of her life. It was the worst thing she had ever felt. She would spend the rest of the night learning it was not the worst thing that could be done to her. There was only one person in the world Elowin went to when the ground gave way, and that person was the one who had raised her. The right hall was empty at this hour, but for the keeper. Vesna sat among her cold looms and her hanging skeins of scent thread the way she always did, still as a held breath, and when Elowin came in with her face wrecked and her composure gone, the old woman did not seem surprised. Vesna was rarely surprised. It was one of the many things about her that Elowin had always taken for wisdom. "Child," Vesna said gently, "sit. Tell me." And Elowin told her. The door, the wine, the king's own voice giving her away to seal a treaty. It came out of her in pieces that did not fit together, and Vesna listened to all of it with her pale eyes steady and her hands folded, and said nothing until Elowin had wrung herself dry. Then she said the thing that would end Elowin's life as she knew it, and she said it so kindly that it did not sound like ending at all. "You are bonded to him," Vesna said, Not sealed, not spoken, but bonded all the same. I have felt it on you for a long while now, and a bond does not care about treaties. It will not release you simply because he has released you. It will sit in your chest and pull toward a man who is about to belong to another woman, every hour of every day, for the rest of your life. Unless. Unless what? Elowen said. Vesna rose and crossed to the oldest of her looms, the one Elowen had never once been permitted to touch. There is a mercy I can do you, the keeper said. A clean release. I can unweave the bond at the root and the pain with it. You will not ache for what you cannot have because you will not remember that you wanted it. It is a small unmaking, a kindness. But it must be done tonight, before the bond sets any deeper, and it cannot be undone once begun. Do you understand me, child? Once I start, there is no calling it back. Elowen thought of a lifetime of standing in warm rooms and aching for a door that would never open. She thought of forever. Do it, she said. Vesna smiled and reached for the thread, and somewhere far below the hall a bell began to toll the turning of the night. And that, though Elowen could not have known it, was the last hour in which anyone in the whole of Drenmark would remember her name. Elowen woke on the cold floor of the right hall with the grey light of dawn coming through the high windows, and her first thought was that the mercy had not worked. She remembered everything. She remembered the door and the wine and the king's voice. She remembered the bond, and she reached for it now the way you reach for a sore tooth with your tongue, bracing for the ache. And there she stopped because the ache was still there. Whatever Vesna had done in the night, she had not taken the wanting. Elowen lay on the flagstones and loved a man who had given her away, and remembered every reason she should not, and felt like the greatest fool in the north for having asked to be spared and been spared nothing at all. She was wrong about that too. She simply had the shape of it backward. The first sign came when she sat up and could not smell the right hall. A wolf does not think about scent any more than a person thinks about the weight of the air. It is simply the world, layered and constant, the wax and the cold stone, and the old wool, and, under all of it, the warm private thread of one's own self that says, "Here I am real, I take up space." Elowen breathed in and got the wax and the stone and the wool. She did not get herself. Where her own scent should have been, there was nothing at all. A hole in the middle of the world exactly her shape, and the wrongness of it stood her straight up, with her heart going hard. She told herself she was still half in dream. She went to find someone. That was her second mistake, though it was hardly a mistake since it was the only thing a frightened person could do. She found Orin first. Orin was on the dawn watch at the foot of the right stair, a sentry so young the leather of his post still creaked when he moved, and Elowen had stood 100 watches at his shoulder and taught him half of what he knew about reading a dark yard. She came down the stair saying his name, and the relief in her own voice embarrassed her. "Orin," she said. "Orin, it is me." He turned toward the sound. His eyes passed over her face, and they kept going. Elowen crossed the space between them. She put her hand on his arm. She felt the warmth of him under her palm, solid and real, and she watched him glance down at his own sleeve, at the place she was gripping, and feel nothing there at all. No hand, no weight. A draft, a chill, a nothing. He rubbed the spot absently and stepped away from the cold, and Elowen was left holding air. Something uneasy had crossed his young face for a moment, the look of a man who has heard a floorboard settle in an empty house. Then he shook it off the way you shake off a draft, and he turned back to the yard, and he did not look at the empty stair again. After that she stopped being careful. She went through the waking keep like a ghost because that was what she had become. She said her name to the hearth keeper Senna, who had braided Elowen's hair for the winter feast not 3 nights past, and Senna looked up from her kettles with the polite blankness of a woman greeting a stranger and asked, not unkindly, whether the poor thing was lost. She said her name to the master of the watch, who had signed her onto the roster with his own hand for 6 years, and he searched a page that no longer held it and told her there was no Elowen in his book and never had been. She said her name to the great scent ledger in the Hall of Records, the roll of every soul the pack had ever claimed, and found the line where she belonged unwoven down to bare vellum, as though a thread had been drawn clean out of a cloth, and the cloth had closed over the gap. She had not been forgotten. Forgotten is a thing that can be undone with a reminder. She had been unmade, removed, taken out of the world so cleanly that the world had not even flinched, and there was only one loom in Drenmark old enough and strong enough to do such a thing, and only one hand that knew how to work it. She went back up the right stair on legs that did not feel like hers. Vesna was at the ancient loom, calm as still water, and when Elowen burst in shouting that she was still here, that she remembered, that something had gone terribly and monstrously wrong, the keeper turned and looked at her. And here was the thing Elowen would turn over and over in the long days to come, the small wrong note under all the enormous wrong ones. Vesna looked at her and saw her. The old woman's pale eyes tracked straight to Elowen's face and held there, clear and knowing, while the whole rest of the kingdom stared through the space she stood in. Whatever the keeper had done, it had a seam in it, and Vesna herself stood on the far side of that seam and could see her ward plainly. "You should not have kept your memory," Vesna said quietly, almost to herself. "That was not meant to remain." "What did you do to me?" Elowen whispered. "I gave you a mercy," the keeper said, and her face was gentle again. So gentle. "You are hurting, child. This will pass. The ceiling is 6 days off, and once the 2 packs are won, all of this will settle. You need only be patient and let it fade. Come away from the door now." But Elowen had spent her whole life learning to read the smallest tells in a dark room, and she had seen it. For half a breath before the gentleness came back down like a shutter, something else had lived in Vesna's face. Not grief, not guilt. Something that had looked for one impossible instant like a woman checking her work. Elowen backed toward the stair. "You did this on purpose," she said. And Vesna, who had never in 18 years raised her voice to the child she had raised, did not deny it. The first thing Elowen learned about being unmade was that it was also a cage. She had thought, in the raw hours after the Right Hall, that she would simply leave. If Drenmark could not feel her, then Drenmark could keep its walls and its cold looms and its king, and she would walk out the east gate and become someone else's problem somewhere far away. She got as far as the gate. She got as far as the threshold stone, the worn slab that marked the boundary of the pack's ground, and there her body stopped as though it had walked into a wall of deep water. She could not cross it. The weave that bound every wolf to the pack ran through that stone, and though it no longer knew her name, it still held her the way a snare holds a rabbit it cannot see. She pushed until her legs shook and her breath tore and the cold sweat ran down her spine, and she did not gain the width of a finger. Unmade or not, she belonged to Drenmark, and Drenmark would not let its ghost wander loose. She sank down on the inside of the threshold with her back against the gate, and understood that whatever undoing had been worked on her, the only place it could be unworked was here, inside these walls, at the one loom strong enough to have done it, which meant Vesna, or the thing that stood above even Vesna, because a keeper's craft, Elowen knew, drew its strength from the Alpha's own bond to the pack. The weave answered to the throne. If there was a hand in all the world that could reach into the old loom and pull her thread back into the cloth against the keeper's will, it belonged to the king, to the man who had given her away, to the very wound she had gone to Vesna to have cut out. Elowen put her face in her hands and laughed once with no humor in it at all. The only road back to herself ran straight through Emmerich of Drenmark, and she would have to walk it as a stranger. So she did what the unmade must do. She became useful, and useful is a coat that fits anyone. No one in a great keep questions a woman carrying something. Elowen picked up a basket of rushlights that first evening and simply kept walking, and by the second day she had learned the great and terrible freedom of being no one. She could go anywhere. She slept in the disused linen store above the kitchens, ate what the hall did not miss, and moved through Drenmark like weather, present and unremarked. The hall servants, who could not hold her in mind from one passing to the next, treated her with the vague friendliness people give a face they assume they have simply forgotten, and she let them, and she watched, and she learned the shape of the king's days the way she had once learned the shape of a dark yard, and all the while the ceiling came on. Elowen counted the days in the preparations she carried past, the Colvane banners going up in the great hall, the extra stores, the scent thread Vesna requisitioned by the armload for a rite that would bind 2 packs into one and, Elowen did not doubt, set her own unmaking permanently into the cloth. Whatever slack remained in the thing that had been done to her, whatever seam still let her stand in the world and remember her own name, it would close the moment the 2 packs became one. She had 6 days, then 5. She learned to hear the number in every bell. She told herself it was strategy. She told herself she was mapping a route to the throne, to the one man who could pull her thread back into the world, and that when the moment came she would make him listen whether he knew her or not. She did not tell herself the other thing. that some starved and traitor part of her had wanted very simply to be near him again, even like this, even as a stranger, even carrying his rushlights past his door. It was on the third evening that she nearly undid herself entirely. She was crossing the upper gallery with an armful of folded right cloth when the corridor ahead of her filled, all at once, with the particular hush that moved through a keep when its alpha walked. She should have stepped into a doorway. She had spent her whole life stepping into doorways. But her body, which had loved this man for 2 years and had not been told to stop, betrayed her. And she was still standing in the open when Emmerich came around the turn of the passage. He was thinner than 3 days ago. She saw it at once, the way you see a change in a thing you have watched closely. There was a grey cast under his eyes and a stiffness in how he held himself, as though he were carrying something heavy and invisible and could not set it down. He walked with his gaze fixed ahead, seeing nothing, a man doing the long grim arithmetic of a treaty in his head, and then, level with her in the middle of the empty gallery, he stopped. Elowen did not breathe. She stood with her arms full of cloth and her heart slamming and watched the King of Drenmark go still beside her, watched his head turn slowly, watched him draw a breath through his nose the way a wolf does when it has caught, at the very edge of the air, some thread it cannot name. His brow furrowed. Something moved behind his tired eyes, reaching, groping after a thing that was not there and yet somehow was. His gaze found her face. For one whole endless moment, the king looked at the woman the entire kingdom had forgotten and almost remembered. "Do I know you?" Emmerich said. And before Elowen could find a single word to answer him with, before she could decide whether the thing rising in her throat was hope or terror, the frown smoothed itself away. The thread slipped out of his grasp, and he shook his head at his own strangeness and walked on down the gallery, leaving her standing alone with her arms full and her whole ruined heart hanging on the echo of those 4 words. A king of Drenmark was never alone. This was the first thing Elowen relearned about Emmerich in the days that followed, watching him from the edges the way she watched everything now. He was attended from the moment he woke to the moment the last candle guttered, ringed always by councillors and stewards and the long grey shadow of the Colvan delegation, and in the whole of it there was not one soul he could say a true word to. A king cannot admit he is afraid. A king cannot say that he does not know. Every face around Emmerich wanted something from him or was carrying word back to someone who did, and he moved among them with his easy public smile fixed on like a mask that had grown into the skin, which was, Elowen came to understand, exactly why he kept finding his way to her. It began as accidents. She would be trimming lamps in the map room after the council had cleared, and he would come back for a paper he had not truly forgotten, and stay. She would be carrying right cloth along the cold north walk where he went to be unwatched, and find him already there, and he would not send her away. He could not have said why the nameless woman with the quiet hands eased something in him. Elowen knew why, and could not tell him. The bond that Vesna had tried to cut still ran between them, frayed but not severed, and it pulled him toward the one cold place in his crowded world, the same way it had once pulled her down a corridor toward a closing door. He drifted to her without deciding to. He simply always seemed to end up where she was, like a man walking downhill in the dark. "You do not gossip," he observed one night. It was late in the map room, and he had been standing over the treaty draft for the better part of an hour without signing it. Every servant in this keep would sell an hour of the king's private talk for a week of wages. You have had a great many hours of it now, and I have not heard one whisper come back. "Who would I tell?" Elowen said. "No one remembers me long enough to listen." She had meant it flatly as fact, but he laughed, a real one, surprised and low, and the sound of it went through her like warmth through cold hands, and she hated how much she had missed it. It was the first time she had made him laugh since before the world forgot her, and the traitor thing in her chest lit up as though it had been waiting all this while for exactly that. "You say the bleak thing as though it were the weather," he said. "I find it restful. Everyone else in my life arranges their face before they speak to me. You do not bother." "Because it does not matter what you think of me," she said. "That is not restful. That is only what is left when a person has nothing left to lose." He looked at her for a long moment then, the tired amusement fading into something more careful, and she thought with a flash of pure animal panic that the almost remembering was coming over him again. But it passed. And what it left behind was worse because it was not recognition, it was interest. He was seeing her now, not as a name he had lost, but as a person he was meeting, plain and new, and choosing to like. So she took a risk, because risks were all she had left and the days were running short. You are being kept blind, she told him. You know it, I think, and cannot prove it, and it eats at you. She nodded at the treaty draft under his hand. You sign what you are handed because every road to the truth in this keep runs through someone who would rather you not have it. But I carry things, Majesty. I go where carried things go. And I can tell you that the keeper has drawn more scent thread from the stores this fortnight than the binding of 2 packs could ever need. Enough for a working 3 times the size. I do not know what it is for, but you are the alpha, and the weave is yours before it is ever hers, and you did not know it was happening. Ask yourself why. She watched the words land. Watched him go still in the particular way of a man who has felt the floor shift and is testing his weight on it. He did not tell her she was mistaken. He did not laugh it away. He set down his pen, and he looked at her as though she had handed him the first honest thing anyone had given him in months, and perhaps she had. Come and go as you please, he said at last. All of it. If any door in this keep stands closed to you, you tell them the king wills it open. He almost smiled. I think more clearly with you near. I cannot for my life say why. He left her the run of the keep that night. A nameless ghost handed the keys to a kingdom, and it should have been everything she needed. A clear road to the throne, to the one hand that could pull her thread back into the world. She had her way in, so she did not understand why, standing alone in the emptied map room with the treaty draft still unsigned on the table, she felt like weeping. It took her a long moment to find the shape of it. And when she did, it frightened her more than the threshold stone had, more than Orin's blank eyes, more than any of it. She was helping him, not using him, helping him. The man who had stood behind a door and given her away to seal a treaty, and she had spent the whole evening trying to open his eyes and make him safe, and some quiet and ruined part of her had been glad the entire time, simply and hopelessly glad, to be of use to him again. She pressed the heel of her hand hard against her breastbone, over the frayed and stubborn thread that would not die. Stop it, she told it. He chose another. You heard him. The thread did not listen. It had never once listened. And Eloin understood that the cruelest thing Vesna had left her was not the forgetting, nor the cage, nor the silence. It was this. She was going to fall in love with him all over again, from the very beginning, as a stranger, and she was going to do it knowing exactly how it ended. On the fourth night, the keeper came looking for her mistake. Eloin did not learn this from being told. No one told her anything anymore. She learned it the way she now learned everything, by watching, and what she watched was the keep itself begin to change around the shape of her. A door she had left open was found and quietly barred. A route she favored through the lower stores grew a new watch upon it. Small things, the kind no one but a ghost would notice, and all of them tightening slowly inward, like a fist closing in the dark. Somewhere above, at the old loom, Vesna had felt the seam in her working start to pull. She had felt the king drift again and again toward a cold place in the air, had seen doors swing open for a nothing, and she had understood that her small unmaking had not held. And a keeper does not leave a loose thread lying, she cuts it, or she pulls it out. They came for Eloin on the north walk, where the wind came off the black hills, and the king went to breathe. Emmerich was there, as he so often was now, his back to the parapet and his public face set down for the hour, and Eloin was with him because she could no longer make herself not be. They were not speaking. That was the strange sweetness of it, that they had reached the place where they did not need to. And so it was Eloin, and not the king, who heard the wrongness first, because she had spent a lifetime learning the sound of a yard gone too quiet. The night watch should have called the quarter hour. It did not. She was moving before she had finished the thought, and that was the only reason Emmerich did not die on the north walk. She caught his sleeve and hauled him down and sideways as the first of them came out of the stairwell dark, and something long and pale hissed through the space where the two of them had just been standing. There were 3 of them, and they moved wrong. They did not look at her. Their heads swept the dark the way a hand sweeps a black table for a dropped coin, searching not for a shape, but for an absence, for the one cold nothing on the walk that should have carried a scent and did not. They were hunting the hole in the world, they were hunting her, and Emmerich stood inside the same patch of dark, close enough to share it, which meant every blade meant for the ghost would find the king first. She did not have time to be afraid. She had time only to be what Vesna had, in the end, forgotten she had made her. Elawan had been raised in a right hall, but she had been trained in a yard. She took the first hunter's wrist as he closed, turned the pale blade back against its owner, and put him down along the parapet hard enough to fold him. She was already moving toward the second when the thing happened that she would turn over for nights afterward. Emmerich moved too. Not away, the way a sane man flees a blade in the dark. Toward. He stepped in at her shoulder and took the second hunter's rush on his own forearm, shielding a nameless servant with a king's body, and there was nothing in his face that had decided to do it. His mind had not chosen it at all. Something older than his mind had reached out through the dark and refused, simply and absolutely refused, to let her be harmed. "Get behind me," they said, at the very same instant, to each other. There was no time to marvel at it. The third hunter drove them apart and back along the walk, and then the first was up again, and Elawan understood with a cold drop in her belly that these ones would not tire and would not miss twice, and that the stairwell at her back was the only way down, and one of them had just stepped into it. Cornered against the parapet with the black drop at her spine, and the king at her side, and three of the keeper's silent hounds closing the gap, she did the only thing left to a woman who had nothing to lose. She threw the folded right cloth over the nearest lamp and killed the light, and the walk dropped into a dark so total that even a wolf's eyes needed a breath to swim up through it. In that one breath she had no scent to give her away, and they had no shape to strike, and she used it, dragging Emmerich by the wrist along the wall she knew in her bones toward the stairwell mouth. She took the hunter guarding it before he found them, a hard strike up under the jaw that dropped him across the top step, and then they were down and through, and she had the stair door barred behind them with a beam meant to keep enemies out of the keep and not for once in. On the far side, a whistle cut the dark, one clean note, and the sound of the hunt above them simply stopped, the way a thing stops when it has been called off and not because it failed. Disciplined, ordered. Someone up there had decided the cost had climbed high enough for one night, and someone up there could decide such things. Emmerich was breathing hard, a shallow line of red opening along his forearm where the second blade had kissed him. Elowen was already on her knees beside the hunter she had dropped on the step, because the guard in her needed to know who, and her hands were fast and certain going through his dark clothes. She found it at his collar. A small thing, sewn into the cloth where a man keeps what he does not want seen. A knot of scent thread worked into a sigil, grey shading to black, a pattern she had watched a pair of old hands tie 1,000 times across 18 years of firelit evenings, the maker's mark of the only loom in Drenmark old enough to unmake a soul. Vesna's mark. The woman who had raised her had just sent 3 wolves into the dark to cut her out of the world for good, and had very nearly cut down a king to do it, and Elowen knelt on the cold step with the proof of it warm in her hand and understood that there was no going back to the right hole. There never had been. The only person left in all the world who had known her was the one who wanted her gone. Emmerich did not raise the keep. Elowen had expected him to. A king set upon in his own house has every right to turn out the watch and pull the place down to its stones, and she had braced for it, for the questions and the search and the terrible risk that a hunt for the hunters would sweep up the scentless ghost who had been standing at the very center of it. Instead, he bound his own arm with a strip of her right cloth in the dark at the foot of the stair and told her to speak of it to no one. "If word goes out that wolves came within a blade's length of me on my own wall," he said, "half the court will call it proof I cannot hold the pack, and the other half will use it to hurry the ceiling along." He was quiet a moment. "And I do not yet know which of the faces around me sent them. Until I do, I would rather they believe the arrow missed than know how near it came." It was, Elowen thought, exactly the right instinct pointed at exactly the wrong person, because the face that had sent them was the one face in his whole life he had never once thought to doubt. She could have told him. She sat there in the dark with Vesna's mark still warm in her fist and the words right there behind her teeth. "The keeper did this. The keeper who raised me, whom you trust with the very soul of your pack." But to say it, she would have had to say the rest, all of it. "I am the one they were hunting. I am the hole in your air. I am a woman you gave away and cannot remember." And she looked at his tired, trusting face in the dark and could not find the door in it that such a truth could pass through. Not yet. Not without proof he could hold in his own 2 hands. So she said nothing. And in saying nothing, she stepped, without knowing it, into the exact shape of the thing that had been done to her. She kept a secret to protect him. She told herself it was for his own good. She had learned that trick somewhere, though she did not yet know from whom. What she did instead, over the 3 nights that were left before the sealing, was fall. They were desperate nights, and the desperation made everything sharper. There was no lazy sweetness in it, no long idle summer of a courtship. There was only a woman with 3 days to live as herself and a king she was not permitted to want, and the bond between them drawing tighter by the hour like a wire pulled to singing. It thickened between them in the dark the way ice thickens on still water, a little more each night. When he handed her a cup on the cold walk, their fingers met and her whole arm woke to the shoulder, and she saw him feel it too, saw him look down at his own hand as though it had done a thing without him. When she changed the dressing on his arm the second night, kneeling close in the lamplight, he went very still and did not breathe, and neither did she, and the space between them filled with something that pulled like the drop off the north wall. She would catch him watching her across a room with a slow, puzzled heat, a man staring at a locked door he was certain held something of his. And she would have to turn away, because the wanting in his face was the wanting she had dreamed of through 2 starved and silent years, and it had come too late, and it was pointed at a woman he did not know he had already traded away. That was the knife of it. Every time the bond hauled her toward him, she heard his own voice again through a gap in a door. "I will name your daughter Luna." She would take that voice and hold it up against the warmth in his eyes, and make herself remember that this man, this exact man, had stood in a warm room and traded her for a treaty, and that she was a fool twice over now, falling a second time down the very same dark stair. It did not help. The heart is not a soldier. It does not stand down because you show it the ground that it lost. On the last night before the sealing, he told her the thing that broke it open. They were in the map room late, the treaty still unsigned because he could not make his hand do it. He had been quiet a long while, and then, without looking at her, in the low voice of a man saying a thing he has never once said aloud, he began to speak. "There is something wrong with me," Emmerich said. "I have told no one. I would sound mad, and a king cannot sound mad, but I think I am grieving someone, and I cannot for my life remember who." Elowen went very still. "It came upon me some days ago," he went on, "a hole. Here." He pressed his fist to his breastbone over the exact place where her own frayed thread pulled, and she felt the pressure of it as though he had laid his hand flat against her, like a room in a house you did not know you had, and the door left standing open, and whoever lived there simply gone. "I catch the edge of them, and they slip. I dream of a voice I cannot place. I walk the long way past the right hall a dozen times a day, and I do not know why, only that my feet believe something is there." He shook his head. "I am to bind my pack to another this very week, and I stand here mourning a ghost with no name and no face. What kind of king does that make me?" He looked up at her then, lost and open and wholly without his mask, and Elowen understood, with a slow and terrible tenderness that hurt worse than any blade on the north walk, that he was describing her. The open door was her. The missing voice was hers. He was grieving her, faithfully and helplessly, and did not know that it was her he grieved, and she was the only soul alive who could have told him, and if she told him now, he would not believe a single word of it. "I think," she said carefully, when she could trust her voice, "that you should not sign that treaty tonight." "Why not?" he asked. "Because a man who is grieving," she said, "should not promise the rest of his life to anyone until he knows what it is he has lost." He stared at her. And in his ruined, searching face, she saw the door tremble, saw the thing behind it strain toward the light. His lips parted. He looked at the woman the whole world had forgotten, as though he stood on the very edge of remembering her, as though one more heartbeat might be enough to do it. And Elowen, who had spent every night for 2 years and every night since the world forgot her wanting exactly this, felt the bond hole taut between them like a rope pulled hard from both ends at once, and knew that she was not going to spend what might be her last night as herself pretending she did not want him. She crossed the room. He rose to meet her without deciding to, the way he did everything with her now, and in the last narrow space between them, she stopped, close enough to feel the warmth come off him, close enough that the frayed thread in her chest and the open door in his seemed almost to touch. "Do not make me the woman you forget," she thought, and did not say. What she said, when she could say anything at all, was his name. And the king of Drenmark, who could not remember losing her, reached up and touched her face as though he had at last found something. He kissed her, and the careful, frozen thing that Elowen had held together with both hands since the night the world forgot her simply came apart. She had braced, without knowing she was bracing, for it to feel like a stranger. It did not. His mouth was warm and certain and terribly familiar, familiar the way a road home is familiar in the dark, and her body knew him even though the world had been made to forget that it ever had. His hand slid into her hair, and the frayed thread in her chest, the stubborn thing that would not die, drew taut, and then, for the first time since the unmaking, sang. The bond opened. It did not open the way she had feared, all at once and dangerous. It opened the way a hand opens, slowly, finger by finger, and through it came the shape of him. Not his thoughts. Something more naked than thoughts. She felt the plain, helpless want of him rolling off him in a dark, warm tide, and under it, deeper, the astonished tenderness of a man who had spent days grieving a hole in his own chest and had walked into a lamplit room and found, impossibly, that the hole had a shape, and the shape was standing before him and letting him hold her. Elowen had been wanted before. She had been wanted for her sword, for her steadiness, for her quiet hands and her habit of seeing what others missed. She had been useful her whole life. She had never once, not in all her years, stood in the path of a man's plain and reasonless wanting, aimed at no part of her but herself. And that, more than the warmth, more than his mouth, was the thing that undid her, because she had spent a lifetime being told in 100 wordless ways that a foundling with no name and no sentkin was a thing the world kept because it was useful and not because it was loved. And here was the king of all the land holding her face in both his hands as though she were the only real thing in the keep. She stopped thinking after that. There was only the lamplight and the cold room gone warm, and the two of them, and the bond widening between them with every breath until she could not tell her own racing heart from his. He said things low against her ear, not her name. He could not reach her name, but wrecked and reverent things. You are the only thing that has made sense to me in weeks. I do not understand you. I do not want to lose you. And she held on to him and let herself, for one stolen night, be a woman who was wanted and not a ghost who was useful. It was near dawn, in the grey hush after, when it happened. She lay with her head on his chest, listening to his heart slow, and the bond lay open and easy between them. And she felt the exact moment the thing behind his door strained toward the light again. His arms tightened around her, his breathing changed. And in his sleep, or half out of it, in the loose, unguarded voice of a man reaching through fog for something he has lost, Emmerich breathed the first sound of her name. Elo, the soft front of it, the shape her whole life had been built upon, rising out of him like a diver breaking the surface. And then it was gone. The weave closed over the gap the way it always did, smooth and final, and his breath evened back into sleep, and the half-word hung in the grey air over Elowen's head, so nearly whole that she could have wept. He was remembering her. Even unmade, even severed, even asleep, the man was fighting his way back to her name, one broken sound at a time. And Elowen lay very still in the arms of the king who had almost said it, and understood that she had run clean out of time to keep lying to herself. She loved him, not the memory of him. Him now, this man, the one who had touched her as though she were real. And at dusk the whole pack would gather to seal him to another woman forever, and if she did not do something reckless before the sun went down, she would lose him a second time, and this time there would be no coming back. The trouble with a bond, Elowen discovered, was that once it was fully open, it did not politely close again because the sun had come up and the world had turned sensible. All that day, moving through the keep with her basket and her borrowed invisibility, she carried Emmerich with her. Not his voice, not his thoughts, but the weather of him, the low, constant hum of another soul laid alongside her own. She felt his boredom in the long council. She felt the grind of his dread each time the Colvan banners caught his eye. Once, sharp and sudden, she felt a bright spike of longing pass through him for no reason, and knew, standing 3 floors away with lamp oil on her hands, that he had just thought of her. It should have been wondrous. It was, instead, a catastrophe, because a bond that ran this hot and this open was a bonfire on a dark hill, and there was one person in Drenmark whose whole life was the reading of such fires. Vesna would feel it. Vesna would feel it and know that the sundering had not merely failed but reversed, that the thread she had cut was weaving itself back into the cloth faster than she could unpick it, and Vesna would move to finish the work before the sealing made it permanent the wrong way. Elowen did not have days. She was no longer certain she had hours. which meant she needed proof, and she needed it now. The one thing she could put into Emmerich's hands that would make him believe the woman he trusted with the soul of his pack had been quietly unmaking souls in the dark. Not a story, not a ghost's word, proof he could hold. So while the whole keep bent itself toward the evening ceiling, while Vesna was down in the great hall walking the Colvane party through the shape of the right, Eloin went up the right stair to the one room she had been forbidden her whole life, and she let herself in. The keeper's records were not kept in ink, they were kept in thread. Along the far wall hung the severance skeins, the account of every unmaking the loom had ever worked, each one a knotted cord the color of old ash, each one a soul taken out of the world and filed away like a receipt. Alawan walked the wall with her heart in her throat and her scentless hands trembling, reading the little vellum tags with a keeper's ward eye, and near the end on a skein still raw and new, still faintly warm to the touch the way fresh work is warm, she found her own name, Elowin, no house, no line. Foundling of the right hall, severed, and below it, on the authorization, where a working this grave required the hand of the pack's own alpha to lend it weight, she found a second mark pressed into the wax. The king's seal, Emmerich's seal, clean and unmistakable, the running wolf of Drenmark, set to the order that had cut her out of the world. The floor seemed to tilt. She put her hand on the cold stone to keep upright and made herself think, made the guard in her push past the roaring in her ears, because the guard knew that a mark on a page was not the whole of a truth, and there was something here she was not yet seeing. But the roaring was very loud, and the seal was very plain, and some old and starving voice underneath it all was already saying the thing it had waited her whole life to say. Of course he signed it. What did you ever think you were? You were always going to be a thing that got signed away. She was so lost in the skein and the seal that she did not hear the enforcers on the stair until their boots were nearly at the door. She spun, the skein still crushed in her fist, and cast about the sanctum for another way out and found none, the one door and no other, and the boots louder now and closer. She pressed herself flat behind the great loom just as the latch lifted. But it was not the enforcers who came through the door first, it was Vesna, and the keeper walked into the room and drew a slow breath through her nose and smiled at the empty air with the patience of a woman who had all the time in the world. I can smell the king all over you, child, Vesna said pleasantly, to a room that appeared to hold no one at all. Come out, we are long past hiding now. Eloin stepped out from behind the loom. There was nothing left to gain in hiding. You kept your memory, Vesna said, studying her the way she studied a flawed working. That was never meant to happen. I confess it has troubled me. But no matter. After tonight it will not signify. Why? Elowen said. Her voice did not shake, which surprised her. Only tell me why. You raised me. You fed me and taught me, and I loved you. Why would you cut me out of the whole world? And Vesna, who had lied to her with tenderness for 18 years, gave her at last the truth, and the truth was worse than any lie. Because you are perfect, child, the keeper said. A foundling, no house, no line, no scentkin, anywhere to raise a cry if ever you should vanish. I did not take you in from mercy. I took you in because a wolf that belongs to no one is a wolf the pack will never miss. I raised you gentle and useful and certain, down in your very bones that you were owed nothing and were no one, and should be grateful for the little you were given. I did not break you after I chose you. I chose you, and then I spent 18 years making you into a thing that could be removed without a single soul feeling the draft. You were never a daughter. You were a length of thread I kept spooled and ready, against the day I should need to pull something out of the weave and have the cloth close over the gap. Each word went into Eloin like a cold nail because each word fit. The lifetime of keeping to the wall. The certainty that she was a guest in every room she entered. The quiet voice that had told her, her whole life, that a woman like her did not get to want things. It had never once been hers. It had been woven into her, thread by patient thread, by the only mother she had ever known. And the day I had need of you came, Vesna went on, when you were fool enough to fall in love with a king. A keeper rules the weave, and through the weave the pack, and through the pack the throne itself. But a true bond, a fated one, is the single thread I cannot touch. A Luna bound to Emmerich by fate would be a Luna I could not manage, could not unpick. You were about to make yourself the one woman in Drenmark that I did not control, and I could not allow it. So I arranged him a bride of my own choosing, and I went to him with grave words of a rogue bond festering in his house. a wild and unsanctioned thing that threatened his throne. And your grieving, faithful king gave me his hand and his seal to cut it out. She tilted her head. He did not know that it was you, but he did not ask either. He signed the woman he loved out of the world to steady his crown, and never so much as asked her name. There it was, the seal upon the skein. He consented to lose you, Vesna said gently. That, I think, is the part that will hurt you longest. Elowen did not remember deciding to run. She only knew she could not breathe the air of that room, and she went past Vesna and the enforcers and down the right stair 3 at a time with the severance skein still crushed in her fist, and ran full into Emmerich coming up. He caught her by the arms. His face was open and wild, and she understood that he had felt it, all of it, her horror pouring down the open bond like floodwater, and he had come to find the source of a pain he could feel and could not name. You, he said, staring at her, the almost knowing naked in his face. It is you. It has always been you. The thing I lost, it was you the whole time. You signed it, Elowen said. He went still. A severance. A rogue bond in your house. The keeper brought you the order, and you set your seal to it, and you did not ask whose life you were ending. She held up the raw ash-colored skein between them. This is me. This is my name on the thread you cut. I loved you for 2 years before the world forgot me, and you signed me out of it to steady your throne. And here, in the one moment where a single true and simple word might have saved something, Emmerich of Drenmark did the thing that frightened men who have ruled too long and trusted too little will always do. He reached for the reasons. I did not know, he said. Elowen, I swear to you, I did not know it was a person. She told me it was a wildness in the weave, a danger to the pack. I would never have done such a thing if I had known. He was still explaining. That was the thing she would remember. Someone had cut her out of the whole world, and the man who had held her in the dark 6 hours before stood on the right stair explaining his reasons, telling her what he had believed and been told and would never have done. And not once did he simply say the thing she needed, which was I am sorry, which was I should have asked, which was you, it should have been you, and I should have known. You did not even ask her name, Elowen said, which was Vesna's phrase, and she hated that it was Vesna's phrase, and it was true all the same. She pulled out of his hands. He let her go, still reaching, still explaining, and she went down the last of the stair and out into the falling dusk with the skein in her fist and the whole ceiling gathering below her like a storm, and she did not look back. Because if she looked back, she would see his face, and she had already lost herself once to that face, and she did not have another self to spare. Vesna came down the stair after her, unhurried, because a keeper is never in a hurry, and found her ward alone in the dusk-blue courtyard, staring at nothing, a dead woman's skein hanging from her fist. Do not waste it, Vesna said. Elowen did not turn. Waste what? The hurt, said the keeper. It is the truest thing you own just now, and it can be spent. She came to Elowen's shoulder, gentle and poisonous as ever. That is the man they mean to bind to a Colvane girl within the hour, and you are the one soul alive who can stop it. Go before the 2 kings and tell them what he is, the wronged mate cast aside and unmade to buy a boarder. Osric will not give his daughter to a faithless wolf. The ceiling breaks, the king falls, and when the dust of him settles, I will be the hand that steadies the realm, and there will be a place at my side for a clever girl with nowhere else to belong. I will give you back a name, Elowen. You need only earn it. And there, for one long and shameful breath, Elowen wanted it. She wanted the revenge, she wanted the belonging, and most of all she wanted so badly her hands ached with it, to not be no one anymore. And Vesna knew exactly which of those wants to pull, because Vesna had spent 18 years installing them. And it was that practiced ease that saved her, because a woman who has just learned that her whole self was woven into her by another's hand learns very fast to know the feel of the loom. She made herself think past the hurt, the way the guard had been trained to think past fear. He is haunted, she thought. Emmerich grieved a woman he could not name, fought up through fog in his sleep to say the front of it, and a bond freely surrendered does not do that. A bond given up by a willing soul releases clean and leaves a man sleeping easy. Only a bond torn from a soul that never agreed to lose it fights that hard to come home. Emmerich's grief was not the guilt of a man who had chosen. It was the wound of a man robbed, exactly as she had been, by the same hand. He had not betrayed her. He had been made to lose her and had mourned her ever since without knowing what he mourned. The only traitor in the whole of Drenmark was standing at her shoulder, offering her a name. So Elowen turned to Vesna, let her face crumple, and said, in a small broken voice, "Tell me what to say." The great hall was full to its cold stone rafters, both packs ranged along its length. At the high end beneath the running wolf banner stood Emmerich, grey-faced and rigid in the black and silver of a king, Osric of Colvunny at his one hand, and the girl Ilva at his other, and before them all the ancient loom had been carried down like an altar, Vesna at it with the binding thread already bright in her fingers. Elowen walked in at the keeper's side as a nobody, seen by no one at all, took her place, and waited for the moment Vesna had given her. It came when the keeper raised her voice over the hall and asked, as the rite required, whether any soul present carried cause why the two packs should not be made one. That was Elowen's cue to step forward and destroy a king. She felt the whole pool of 18 patient years urging the words up her throat. Denounce him, break him, take the name I promised you, and she opened her mouth and said instead, "The true thing. Your keeper is a murderer of souls," Elowen said, "and I am the proof of it." The hall did not gasp because the hall could not see her. What it saw was a strange plain woman none of them could quite hold in their eyes, speaking nonsense out of the keeper's shadow, and a low, uneasy murmur went through the packs, 100 people trying to look at a thing that kept sliding off their gaze. Vesna's face did not flicker. "The poor creature is unwell," the keeper said smoothly, lifting a hand, and along the walls the enforcers stirred. She had perhaps 3 heartbeats before they reached her, and did not spend them on the hall. She turned to Emmerich, and she stopped fighting to be believed, and she did the one thing she had spent 2 years and 1 long night refusing to do. She threw the bond wide open. She took the frayed and stubborn thread in her chest, the thing she had tried so hard to smother, and she flung the whole of herself down it toward him. Everything, the long years of loving him in silence, the cold doorways, the north walk, the lamplight, her name, her name, her name. And Emmerich of Drenmark, with a bride at his side and a crown of dread upon his head, went rigid as though struck, and the door inside him that had trembled for 6 days blew clean off its hinges. He remembered. She saw it hit him, saw 18 years of the keeper's careful cloth tear across in a single instant, saw the grief find its face at last and the face be hers. And because the weave draws its strength from the alpha's own bond, because a keeper's craft is only ever borrowed from the throne it serves, the moment the king's soul roared that this woman was real, and his, Vesna's great and patient working, came apart like rotten cloth. The whole drew one breath, and on the out-breath 100 wolves flinched as the world corrected itself around a woman who had stood in it all along, unseen. Her name and her face came back to them, only her scent did not, the deepest thread of her, the marker of the bond itself, still severed at the loom, waiting on a thing no king could command. "Elowen," Emmerich said, in a voice that carried to every stone. And this time the whole of it came out of him, ringing and sure. The pack remembered her. She watched it move through them, the horror and the recognition, Oren's young face going white, Senna's hand flying to her mouth, and she watched Vesna understand, in the same instant, that the one thread she could not touch had just unmade 18 years of work before 2 kings and every wolf that mattered. The keeper did not waste breath on denial. She had never wasted anything. She reached to the loom, took up a length of raw severance thread, and struck at Elowen with it the way another woman might strike with a knife, a killing unmaking meant to finish in one stroke what the long game had failed to do. But Vesna had made one last mistake, the oldest one in the world. She had trained the weapon she was now trying to kill. Every knot of that killing thread, every turn of a keeper's hand, Elowen had watched across 18 firelit years. She caught the working as it came, the way she had caught a blade on the North Walk, turned it, and sent it home. Vesna's own severance closed around Vesna's own thread in the weave, and the keeper of Drenmark went out of the world by the exact craft she had spent a lifetime perfecting, unmade before the pack she had ruled from the shadows, her name already sliding out of every memory in the hall even as she fell. Then it was done, and the hall was in an uproar, Osric shouting and Ilva weeping, and the enforcers throwing down their thread. And through all of it, Emmerich came down from the high end of the hall, with his eyes fixed on Elowen, and nothing else, the whole ruined weight of a man handed back the thing he never knew he lost. "Elowen," he said, reaching for her. "You are alive. You are here." I remember all of it." "Stop," she said. He stopped. I know you did not choose it, she said, and her voice was steady and terribly quiet, and the hall quieted to hear her. I know she used you as she used me. I believe that. She looked at him, at the face she had lost herself to twice over now. But you did not ask, Emmerich. She stole me out of the whole world, out of your own arms, and not one soul in this kingdom came looking. Not the pack, not my friends, not you. You felt a hole in your chest for 6 days and called it madness, and signed the paper, and let them dress you for another woman's wedding. You let them take my name, and you did not come. His face broke. Elowen, please. I am glad you are free of her, she said. I am glad you will be a good king because you will. But I was no one for 18 years because she made me no one, and I have only this very hour become someone in my own right, in front of all of you by my own hand. She shook her head, and the tears came, and she let them fall. I will not hand that self straight back to a man who could lose me and never notice, not even you. And Elowen turned, before both Pax and the fallen loom and the king, with his hands still open in the empty air, and she walked out of the great hall on her own 2 feet, a woman with a name, and let the whole kingdom watch her go. The realm did not fall. Realms rarely do, for all that they threaten to. The Colvan alliance was quietly let go, a treaty sealed on a stolen woman's grave having lost its savor for everyone, and Osric took his daughter home, and Ilva, who had wanted the crown no more than Elowen had wanted to lose it, was said to be relieved. Drenma closed the wound in itself and went on. Elowen went on too, though it took her a while to learn how to be a person the world remembered. They gave her the loom. There was a grim justice in it that no one missed. The pack had need of a keeper, and there was exactly one soul left in Drenmark who understood the old craft, having been raised at Vesna's very knee, and so the foundling with no name became the keeper of the weave. Elowen took up the loom that had unmade her and swore, privately, upon the raw skein that still bore her name, that no soul under her hand would ever again be cut out of the world in the dark. She was good at it. She had always been good at the things she set her mind to. That had never once been her difficulty. Her difficulty was the king. Emmerich remembered everything now, every doorway, and every stolen hour and every day of the 2 silent years before, and the remembering had done to him what the forgetting had done to her. He courted her with the desperation of a man trying to fill a well with a spoon. The letters came first, 2 and 3 a week in his own hand, and she read every one and answered none. Then visits on the thinnest of pretexts, a question about a binding, some small matter of the watch, and he would linger in the doorway with his whole heart in his eyes until she gave him the flat courtesy of a keeper to her king and went away. Once she came down at dawn to find the right stair filled with winter roses, out of season and ruinously dear, and she had her people carry them to the sick house and said nothing, though she kept, without quite deciding to, a single one. Orin thought she ought to forgive him. Senna, who had wept the day the world remembered her, thought so too and said so, often and without invitation. He is wretched, Senna said. The whole keep is wretched watching the 2 of you be wretched at each other. But Elowen only shook her head and went back to her loom, because being wretched was a thing a person could survive, and being lost again was not, and she did not yet know how to explain that difference to people who had never once been unmade. And then, in the deep of the 2nd month, the letters stopped. There came one last one, shorter than the rest. You are right, it read, and I have been selfish in my sorrow, asking you to carry it. You made yourself with your own 2 hands, and I have no claim upon a thing I did not make. I will trouble you no further. Be well, keeper. And that was all of it, and he kept his word. No more letters. No more roses. When they passed in the cold corridors, he inclined his head, keeper, even and never cold, and went on his way. And it was exactly what she had told him she wanted, and it sat in her chest like a swallowed stone. She had wanted him to stop, so she could not understand why the stopping felt so very much like being forgotten all over again. She was still turning that over 3 nights later when Orin came into the right hall without knocking, grey to the lips, Senna at his shoulder. The king, he said. Keeper, the king is gone. Elowen was on her feet before she knew it. Gone where? No one knows, Senna said. His bed not slept in, his sword on its stand, no horse gone from the stables, no word to a single living soul. He has not been seen since the middle bell. And we sent the trackers, keeper. The scent, Elowen said, already knowing, already cold. They lost it, Orin said. At the door of the old right hole. It goes to that door and it simply stops, the way a scent stops when a man does not mean to be followed. And Elowen stood in the loom room with her heart going hard, and understood that there was only one way left to find him, the one thread she had spent 2 months smothering under the ash of her own hurt, hoping it would wither and let her go. She pressed her hand flat to her breastbone, over the place where it still, stubbornly, faithfully refused to die. It is duty, she told herself. He is the king. Finding him is the keeper's task. It was not duty. It had never once, in all this long dark winter, been duty. She opened the bond. The bond opened, and Elowen nearly went to her knees. She had braced for his fear. She found it, a thin, cold thread, but under it was something far worse, something she knew from the inside because she had felt it once herself on a cold right-hole floor. She felt him dwindling. She felt the edges of him going thin and uncertain, a soul beginning, very slowly, to come loose from the world. She had felt exactly this the night Vesna unmade her. Someone was working a sundering, and this time the soul upon the loom was his. She ran. The old right hole stood dark and cold at the dead end of the keep, its loom long unused, and Elowen hit the door at a dead run and threw it wide, braced for enforcers, for a captor, for a body. She found only Emmerich, alone, kneeling before the ancient loom with his sleeves pushed back and his own bond thread strung across it in his unsteady hands, halfway through the most dangerous working a soul can attempt, which is to cut itself free. He looked up at her, and his face was grey and sheened with sweat and lit, underneath all of it, with a terrible gentleness. "You should not have come," he said. His voice was already going thin. That was rather the entire point. "Stop," she said. "Emmerich, stop. You do not know what you are doing. A bond half-cut will take you down with it." "I know exactly what I am doing," he said. "I have had the finest teacher in the realm on the subject of unmaking." He smiled or tried to. "I am doing it properly this time, from my own side, with my own hand. No one deceived into it, no seal on a paper, no order given in the dark. Only me, choosing at the last the one thing I should have let you have from the start." "What thing?" she whispered. "The choice," he said. "You told me I let them take you, and did not come." He drew a ragged breath, and the loom thread trembled between his fingers, and she felt the pull of it in her own chest. "You were right. So I am coming now. As long as this thread runs between us, you will never truly know whether you stayed for me or only for the pull of the thing. You will always wonder if the fate made you do it. I cannot give you back the 18 years she stole, nor the 2 before them, nor the 6 days I mourned you and did not know your name. But I can give you this. I can take the fate out of it." He met her eyes. "I would rather lose you as a free woman than keep you by a thread you never chose. So I am cutting it. And when it is gone, if you walk out of this room, you will walk out truly free, and I will have done, at the very last, one honest thing by you." He turned back to the loom. His hands were shaking so badly now that he could barely hold the thread. "Go, Elowen," he said. "It is almost finished. You do not have to watch." And Elowen, standing in the doorway of the room where a man was unmaking himself to set her free, understood at last the thing that 2 months of hurt had hidden from her. She had spent all this time terrified of being lost again, of handing her hard-won self to a man who might not notice if it vanished. And here was that same man killing the bond with his own 2 hands, precisely so that he could never again hold her by anything but her own free will. He was not trying to keep her. He was trying to make certain she was never kept against her knowing again. It was the one gift that could reach all the way down to the wound Vesna had made. And he was paying for it with his life, and never meant for her to see it. She crossed the room. She did not run now. She walked, the way she had walked out of the great hall, on her own 2 feet, choosing every single step. She put her hand over his on the thread. "Let go," she said. "Emmerich, I have to finish it," he breathed. "You are the king," she said, "and I am the keeper of the weave, and this is my loom now, not yours, and you are making a hash of it." Her voice cracked straight down the middle, and she let it crack. "Let go, Emmerich. That is a command from your keeper. Take your clumsy hands off my craft." And the king of Denmark, who had never once in his life let go of anything without a fight, looked up at the woman he had lost and lost again, and let go. The half-cut thread sprang loose. The strain of it caught up with him all at once. The price of a working carried too far, and his eyes rolled, and his strength went out of him like water from a cracked basin, and he pitched forward off his knees. Eloin caught him before he struck the stone and went down under his weight and held the whole heavy, senseless length of him in her arms on the cold floor of the right hall, while the first grey of dawn came in through the high windows. She could have let it end there. The thread hung slack and half-severed between them, needing only to be left alone to finish dying, and then it would be as he had wanted, the fate gone, the pull gone, the choice truly and wholly hers with nothing left to compel it. So Eloin made her choice. She laid him down gentle on the floor, rose, and went to her loom, the loom that had unmade her, the loom that was hers now, and took the half-cut bond thread up in her keeper's hands. And by the pale light of the dawn that had once taken everything from her, in the very room where a soft old voice had cut her out of the world, Eloin wove it back. Not because a fate compelled her, not because a bond pulled at her, because she was a woman with a name and a craft and a free and open choice, and out of the whole wide world of things she might have chosen, she chose him. She wove them back together, thread over patient thread, his soul to hers, and this time no keeper living or dead would ever unpick it, because the only hand strong enough to work this loom was the one doing the weaving. When it was done, when the bond ran whole and warm between them once more, Emmerich stirred on the floor and opened his eyes, and the first thing he did before he knew where he was or what had happened was breathe in and go still. "You smell of nothing," he said hoarsely, staring up at her, because a scentless woman still stood where his eyes told him a woman stood. And then, as she watched, as the newly woven bond drew tight and true between them, it came. Warm and particular and entirely her own, the scent the world had stolen before one long ago dawn, welling back up into the air around her for the first time since Vesna's loom. His breath caught on it, and his whole face came apart. "There you are," Emmerich whispered. "Gods, there you are." They were not wed quickly. Eloin would not be hurried into anything ever again, and she made him earn it. And he did, day over patient day, with a joy that never dimmed. He asked her badly and beautifully, and more than once at the loom, until she threatened to weave his mouth shut. And on a perfectly ordinary morning, with no treaty riding upon it, and no pack looking on, and nothing at all in the world compelling her but her own free heart, she said yes. The whole city came out for the binding of the king and the foundling keeper, the woman the kingdom had once forgotten and would now be quite unable ever to forget again. He wept during the vows. She had known he would. She very nearly did not, and the bond gave her away, and he laughed at her through his own tears, and she stopped minding who saw. "You are stuck with me now," he murmured when it was done, his hand finding hers. "No one is ever going to unmake you again. I will not allow it, and neither, I suspect, will you." "I am the one who holds the loom," she reminded him. "It was never going to be up to you." "No," he agreed, smiling. "It was always going to be up to you." He pressed his mouth to her hair. "That is rather the whole point of you, keeper." And somewhere in the warm and crowded hall, on the far side of a long, dark winter, a woman who had once stood at the edge of every room she entered stood at the very center of this one, real and scented and named and freely chosen, and let herself be seen.